The projector flickered to life in the darkness, and nobody in the room was prepared for what they were about to see. Commander Zelthar stood at the front of the lecture hall at the Galactic Defense Academy, his 4 eyes scanning the rows of young cadets from a dozen different worlds. The room buzzed with conversation, the kind of careless chatter that came from students who thought they already knew everything. These were the best and brightest from across the civilized galaxy. The children of diplomats and military heroes, all gathered on the neutral station of Arcturus Prime to learn the art of warfare and peacekeeping. "Settle down," Zelthar's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The commander was old by any species standard, his crystalline skin dulled by centuries of service, but his presence still commanded respect. Today's lesson concerns the human exclusion protocols. As you all know, the Galactic Council implemented these protocols 73 cycles ago, shortly after first contact with Earth. A ripple of laughter spread through the cadets. Humans. The very word had become something of a joke among the younger generation. Nobody took them seriously anymore. They were the species that had been deemed too dangerous to join the greater galactic community, too unpredictable, too violent. They were quarantined on their little blue world, forbidden from venturing beyond their own solar system. "Sir, with respect," a young Threxian named Court spoke up from the third row, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Why waste our time on humans? They're barely worth mentioning. A primitive species that couldn't even colonize their own moon before we found them. My father says they're nothing but savages playing with fire." Several other cadets nodded in agreement. The sentiment was common enough. Humans were a cautionary tale, nothing more. A species so violent that they had to be contained for the good of the galaxy. Zeltar's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Your father, Cadet Court, commanded a frigate during the assessment period, did he not?" "Yes, sir. He was part of the observation fleet. He's told me all about the humans. They fight each other constantly, destroy their own planet, kill their own kind over the smallest disagreements. Frankly, sir, I'm surprised the Council didn't just sterilize the planet and be done with it." The laughter that followed was uncomfortable but genuine. Even some of the more diplomatic students smiled. After all, what Court was saying wasn't wrong, was it? The reports were clear. Humans were dangerous, irrational, prone to violence. The galaxy was better off with them contained. "I see," Zelthar said quietly. He turned to the projector controls. "Then you'll have no objection to viewing the classified footage that led to the human exclusion protocols." That got their attention. Classified footage? Nobody had mentioned that before. The official reports were dry, technical documents full of statistics about human aggression and warfare. But footage? Actual recordings? "Sir, I didn't know there was video evidence," a Vaxian cadet named Shira spoke up. "The public records only mention observation reports and cultural analysis." "That's correct." "Cadet Shira, the footage I'm about to show you has been restricted to senior military command and council members for 7 decades. However, given the recent incidents near the Sol system, the Council has decided that the next generation of officers needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Zelthar's voice grew heavy. "What you're about to see is not entertainment. It's not meant to glorify or condemn. It's meant to teach you a single vital lesson about the species we've chosen to keep separated from the rest of us." The room fell silent. Even Court stopped smirking. The lights dimmed further and the projector hummed to life. The first image was simple enough. A view of Earth from orbit. That beautiful blue and green marble that had captivated the first explorers who'd stumbled across it. It looked peaceful from up there, harmless. This footage was compiled by the first contact team during their 3-year observation period, Zelthar narrated. What you're seeing is Earth as it was 73 cycles ago. Population, approximately 7 billion humans. Technology level, early space age. They had achieved orbit, landed on their moon, and sent primitive probes to neighboring planets. By all standard metrics, they were ready for contact. The image shifted to ground level. Cities sprawled across continents, massive and chaotic. Vehicles clogged primitive roads. Humans walked the streets by the millions, going about their daily lives completely unaware that they were being watched from above. The first contact team's mission was straightforward: observe analyze and determine if humanity was ready to join the Galactic Council. The initial reports were promising. Humans had art, music, literature. They had built civilizations, created technologies. They showed all the markers of a species ready to take its place among the stars. Another cadet, a gentle Lumarian named Vess, raised a tentacle. "So what went wrong, sir? If they seemed so promising, why did we seal them away?" Zelthar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed another button. The footage changed. This is where things became complicated. You see, the observation team made a discovery. Humans, unlike every other sentient species we'd encountered, had a unique relationship with conflict. And I don't mean the occasional territorial dispute or resource war. I mean something fundamental to their very nature. The screen now showed what looked like a memorial of some kind. A large wall covered in names, thousands upon thousands of them. Humans stood before it, some weeping, others simply staring in silence. This is one of their war memorials. There are hundreds like it across their planet. This particular one commemorates a conflict they call World War II. It lasted 6 of their years and claimed approximately 75 million human lives. A shocked murmur ran through the cadets. 75 million? That was more than the entire population of some council worlds. "Surely that's an error, sir," Court said, though his voice had lost its earlier smugness. 75 million casualties from a single war? That's impossible. No species could sustain those losses and survive. Not only did they survive, Cadet Court, but that wasn't even their deadliest century. The observation team cataloged human conflicts going back thousands of their years. The numbers were staggering. In just the 100 years before first contact, humans fought 2 global wars, dozens of regional conflicts, and countless smaller engagements. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet several times over. They built vast armies. They created machines of war that dwarfed anything we'd seen from a species at their technology level. The footage continued, showing images of old human weapons. Primitive by galactic standards, but there was something unsettling about them. The tanks, the aircraft, the missiles, they were designed with a singular purpose. Not exploration, not defense, but destruction. The council observers were alarmed, Zelthar continued. Here was a species that seemed to excel at warfare. They studied it, perfected it, made it into an art form. Every generation of humans seemed more capable of violence than the last. The observation team recommended immediate quarantine, so we locked them away because they're good at killing each other? Shira asked. Forgive me, sir, but that seems like it actually makes them less of a threat. If they're too busy fighting among themselves, what danger do they pose to us? It was a fair question, and several other cadets nodded in agreement. If humans were so self-destructive, why worry about them? Zelthar's expression grew grim. That's what the council thought too initially. In fact, some members argued for immediate integration. They believed that exposure to galactic society would calm human aggression, give them something bigger to aspire to. There was even talk of offering them limited membership, perhaps as a probationary species. So what changed their minds? Vess asked softly. The incident, Zelthar said simply. He pressed another button on the controls. What you're about to see is the reason for the human exclusion protocols. This footage has never been shown outside of the highest levels of command. You will not discuss it with anyone who hasn't been properly cleared. Is that understood? A chorus of, "Yes, sir," echoed through the hall. The screen went black for a moment, then new footage appeared. It showed the bridge of a council observation ship, one of the massive scientific vessels that had been monitoring Earth. The timestamp indicated it was from the final month of the observation period. A calm voice spoke in Galactic Standard, translated for the recording. Observation log, day 187. Science Officer Mextrin recording. We've detected an unscheduled human spacecraft launch from their North American continent. Single-stage chemical rocket. Appears to be a supply mission to their orbital station. Nothing unusual. The footage showed a view of Earth from orbit. Sure enough, a tiny dot of light rose from the planet's surface, trailing fire. It was primitive, almost crude by galactic standards, but it flew straight and true. We've seen this before, Court muttered. Human rockets. What's the big deal? Wait, Zelthar said quietly. On the screen, something changed. The observation officer's voice became urgent. Commander, we're detecting an anomaly. The human launch vehicle has suffered a catastrophic failure. Multiple systems offline. It's breaking apart. The footage switched to a closer view. The human rocket was indeed failing, pieces breaking off, flames erupting from its side. It tumbled through the thin upper atmosphere, clearly doomed. Confirmed there are humans aboard, another voice said. 7 crew members. Their escape systems have failed. Commander, they're going to die. Should we intervene? There was a pause. Negative. First contact protocols are still in effect. We cannot reveal ourselves. Continue monitoring. The cadets watched in uncomfortable silence as the human spacecraft broke apart. They might have been soldiers in training, but watching sentient beings die was never easy, no matter the species. But then something unexpected happened. Sir, the observation officer's voice cracked with surprise. Sir, the humans are transmitting. Audio and video. They know they're dying. They're recording messages. The footage switched to show the interior of the dying spacecraft. 7 humans in bulky pressure suits floated in zero gravity, surrounded by smoke and sparks. They knew they were doomed. Anyone watching could see it in their faces. And yet, one of them, a female with dark skin and calm eyes, was speaking into a camera. Her voice was steady despite the alarms blaring around her. The translator AI provided subtitles. Mission Control, this is Commander Sarah Chen. We've lost primary and secondary power. Life support is failing. We have maybe 10 minutes. She paused, taking a breath that seemed to steady her entire crew. I want everyone to know that we understood the risks. We knew what we signed up for. Space exploration has always been dangerous. People have died reaching for the stars before, and others will die after us. That's the price of pushing forward. Another crew member, a younger male, drifted into frame. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. Tell my kids I love them. And tell them to keep looking up. Don't let this stop you. Don't ever stop reaching. One by one, the doomed humans recorded their final messages. Not one of them screamed. Not one of them begged for help that wouldn't come. They knew they were dead, and they faced it with a courage that made the watching cadets fall silent. This is Flight Specialist Rodriguez, another human said. His hands were working frantically at a control panel even as he spoke. I'm transmitting all our data. The engineering failure that caused this. You need to know what went wrong so you can fix it. Don't make the same mistakes we did. Learn from this. He was dying, and he was thinking about the next mission, about making sure nobody else died the same way. Commander Chen spoke again. We represent the best of humanity. The curious, the brave, the ones who looked at the stars and said, we belong there too. Whatever happens to us in the next few minutes, remember that we chose this. We chose to explore. We chose to push boundaries. We chose to... The transmission cut out. The spacecraft had broken apart completely, scattering debris across the orbital path. All 7 humans died in seconds. The observation ship's bridge was silent for a long moment. Then the commander's voice, heavy with emotion, broke through. Record in the log. We just witnessed something extraordinary. Those humans knew they were dying, and their last thoughts weren't for themselves. They were thinking about their mission, their families, their species' future. I've never seen anything like it. Zelthar froze the footage. The lecture hall was completely quiet now. No one was laughing anymore. The observation team filed their final report 3 days later, Zelthar said. In it, they noted something that would change everything. During the entire 3-year observation period, they had documented humans at their worst, fighting wars, destroying each other, committing acts of terrible violence. But in that final spacecraft disaster, they saw something else. They saw what humans become when they're pushed to the absolute edge. He changed the footage again. This time, it showed a different scene, a human city after what looked like a natural disaster. Buildings had collapsed, fires burned, and chaos reigned. But among the destruction, humans were helping each other, pulling survivors from rubble, sharing food and water, working together despite the danger. The team reviewed thousands of hours of footage looking for patterns, and they found them. Yes, humans fight. Yes, they're violent. Yes, they've nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. But when faced with genuine adversity, when pushed to the breaking point, they do something remarkable. They don't break. They come together. They endure. More footage played. Humans in primitive spacesuits making repairs on their orbital station while it leaked air. Humans fighting fires that raged through their cities. Humans forming chains with their own bodies to rescue others from floods. Again and again, the footage showed humans facing impossible situations and refusing to give up. The council analyzed everything, Zelthar continued. They brought in psychologists, anthropologists, military strategists. Everyone tried to understand what made humans different. And eventually they reached a conclusion that terrified them. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Humans don't have thicker armor than other species. They're not stronger or faster. Their technology at the time was centuries behind ours. But they have something else, something we'd never encountered before. They have an absolute refusal to accept defeat, an almost irrational determination to survive. And when you combine that with their capacity for violence, their talent for warfare, their ability to adapt and innovate under pressure... Court's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, what are you saying?" Zelthar met his eyes. "I'm saying the Council realized that if humans ever got into space, if they ever developed faster-than-light travel, if they ever gained access to galactic technology and resources, they would become something unprecedented. Not conquerors necessarily, not villains, but something we had no framework for understanding. A species that treats peace like other species treat war and treats war like an art form they've spent millennia perfecting. The projector showed one final image, Earth, peaceful and blue, surrounded by a network of defensive satellites. The quarantine barrier that had kept humanity contained for 7 decades. The human exclusion protocols weren't meant to protect us from human aggression," Zelthar said quietly. "They were meant to protect us from human determination. Because the Council realized something that day, watching those astronauts die with such courage. They realized that if you gave humans a challenge, any challenge, they wouldn't rest until they'd overcome it. If you gave them an enemy, they would find a way to defeat it. If you gave them an impossible problem, they would solve it or die trying. And dying wouldn't stop the next human from picking up where they left off." The lights came up slowly. The cadets sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd learned. This wasn't what they'd expected. This wasn't a story about primitive savages who needed to be contained. This was something else entirely. "Sir?" Shira asked hesitantly. "You mentioned recent incidents near the Sol system. What's happened?" Zelthar's expression grew even more grave. "That's what we're going to discuss next. You see, the quarantine has held for 7 decades. The humans have tested it, certainly. They've sent probes, tried to break through, made attempts to communicate. But they've never succeeded. Until now." He pulled up a new file on the projector. 3 weeks ago, a council patrol detected unusual activity near the quarantine barrier. At first, we thought it was another probe attempt, but it wasn't. The humans have been busy during their isolation. Very busy. And what they've built, well, you'll need to understand the full context before we go further. Zelthar looked out at his students, seeing their faces transformed from mockery to uncertainty to something approaching respect. Good. That was a start. For your next lesson, you'll need to understand human history in depth. Their wars, their heroes, their capacity for both great evil and great good. You need to understand how a species can be simultaneously the most violent and the most compassionate in known space. You need to understand what drives them. He powered down the projector. Class dismissed. But before you go, I want you to think about something. Those astronauts who died, they could have spent their last minutes in terror, in anger, in despair. Instead, they spent them making sure their sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. They died thinking about others, about the future, about the next people who would try what they'd tried. Zelthar's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but everyone heard him clearly. Now imagine an entire species like that. Billions of them, all with that same stubborn refusal to give up. All with that same willingness to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. All with that same talent for warfare and innovation and survival. He let that sink in for a moment. And then imagine what happens when they finally break through our quarantine. Because make no mistake, cadets, they will break through. The only question is whether we'll be ready to face them when they do. Dismissed. The cadets filed out slowly, their earlier confidence shaken. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was making jokes about primitive humans or savage Earthlings. They'd seen something in that footage that had changed their perspective entirely. Court lingered behind, waiting until the others had left. "Sir, with respect, why show us this now? Why not during basic training?" Zelthar regarded him carefully. "Because in 3 weeks, you'll all be assigned to your first posts, and several of you have been selected for positions near the Sol quarantine zone. Because in 3 weeks, you'll all be assigned to your first posts, and several of you have been selected for positions near the Sol quarantine zone. You needed to understand what you might be facing. You think they're going to break through? I know they are," Zelthar said simply. "The question isn't if, Cadet Court, it's when. And more importantly, it's what happens next. Will we welcome them? Will we try to push them back? Will we go to war?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But I do know this. Humanity has had 73 years to think about nothing except how to break free. 73 years to build, to plan, to prepare. 73 years of being told they're not good enough for the galaxy. Sir, that footage, those astronauts, were they really that brave, or did you select the best example to make a point?" Zelthar smiled sadly. "I selected it because it was the incident that changed the Council's mind. But brave? Cadet, I've been in the military for 300 years. I've seen soldiers from 100 different worlds face death. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, what you saw in that footage wasn't unusual for humans. That was just how they are." Court left the lecture hall with a lot to think about. As he walked back toward his quarters, he passed a viewing port that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, hidden behind the quarantine barrier, 7 billion humans were living their lives, building their civilizations, dreaming their dreams, and planning their escape. Part 2. The outpost on the edge of the Sol quarantine zone had been constructed 70 years ago and barely changed since. It was a simple station, more automated than manned, designed to monitor the barrier and send alerts if anything unusual happened. For most of its existence, the posting had been considered a quiet backwater, the kind of assignment given to soldiers who needed a rest or officers who disappointed their superiors. Lieutenant. Court stood on the observation deck and stared at the invisible wall that separated humanity from the rest of the galaxy. His first assignment after graduating from the academy, and he'd drawn quarantine duty. He should have been disappointed, but after Commander Zelthar's lecture 3 months ago, he'd actually requested this post. He wanted to see for himself. Wanted to understand what all the fuss was about. The Sol system glowed in the distance, its yellow star bright and stable. Around it orbited 8 planets, including the small blue world that housed humanity. From here, Earth looked peaceful, deceptive. "Anything interesting on the sensors?" he asked the duty officer, a weary Gorthian named Prex who'd been stationed here for 5 years. "Same as always, Lieutenant. The humans send out a probe every few weeks. It hits the barrier, bounces back, and they retrieve it. They've been doing it for decades. Like clockwork." Prex didn't even look up from his screen. "You'll get used to the routine. This is the quietest post in the galaxy." Court nodded, but he wasn't so sure. He'd been reviewing the logs since his arrival last week, and he'd noticed something odd. The probe launches were indeed regular, but they'd been increasing in frequency over the past year. What used to be monthly tests had become weekly, then daily. Now, according to the logs, the humans were launching multiple probes per day. "Doesn't it seem strange to you?" Court asked. "Why keep testing the barrier so often? They know it works." Prex shrugged his massive shoulders. "Who knows why humans do anything? Maybe they're hoping we'll get bored and turn it off. Maybe it's some kind of ritual. Maybe they just like wasting resources. Either way, it's not our problem as long as they stay on their side." A soft chime interrupted them. Prex glanced at his screen and sighed. "And there's another one. Human probe just launched from Earth orbit. Should hit the barrier in about 10 minutes, see? Like clockwork." But this time, Court noticed something different. "Prex, look at the telemetry. This probe is different. It's bigger than the others, and its trajectory is off. It's not heading for the standard test point." Prex finally looked up. His interest piqued. He pulled up the detailed sensor data, and his expression shifted from boredom to concern. "You're right. That's not their normal test protocol. This thing is 3 times the size of their usual probes, and it's accelerating hard. What are they up to?" The 2 officers watched as the probe streaked through space toward the quarantine barrier. As it approached, Court thought he saw something odd on the sensors. Energy readings that didn't match standard human propulsion systems. Prex, are you seeing this? Those energy signatures. The probe hit the barrier and kept going. For a fraction of a second, the impossible happened. The barrier flickered. The probe pushed through a few meters, creating a ripple in the energy field like a stone breaking the surface of water. Then the barrier reasserted itself, slamming shut and annihilating the probe in a flash of light. But for that tiny moment, something had penetrated the quarantine. For the first time in 73 years, something from Earth had touched the other side. Alarms screamed throughout the outpost. Prex was on his feet, his casual demeanor gone, replaced by professional urgency. All stations, this is Outpost Barrier 7. We have a quarantine breach. Repeat, quarantine breach. Probe from Sol system achieved temporary penetration of the barrier. All hands to battle stations. Court's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. The barrier was supposed to be impenetrable. It was generated by technology so advanced that even humanity's descendants 1,000 years from now shouldn't be able to challenge it. And yet, how did they do it? Court whispered. More alarms. The sensor officer called out, "Sir, detecting multiple launches from the Sol system. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. They're launching everything they have." On the view screen, the Sol system erupted with activity. Spacecraft lifted from Earth, from its moon, from orbital stations. They weren't military vessels. The sensor readings showed them to be converted civilian craft, cargo haulers, even what looked like mining equipment. But they all had one thing in common. They were heading for the barrier at maximum speed. "What are they doing?" Prex demanded. "This is suicide. The barrier will destroy them all." Court understood first. "They're testing it." That first probe didn't just fail, it succeeded enough to give them data. Now they're going to try variations. Different energy frequencies, different approach angles, different speeds. They're not trying to break through today. They're trying to learn how. And they were doing it with desperate urgency, launching wave after wave of craft directly at the barrier. Each one carried experimental equipment. Each one tried something slightly different. And each one was destroyed in a flash of energy when the barrier rejected it. But the humans kept coming. "Sir, we need to report this to command," Court said. "Already done," Prex replied grimly. "Fleet Command is scrambling a response force. They want us to monitor and record everything. Every probe, every approach vector, every energy reading. Apparently, Command wants to understand exactly what the humans are attempting." Over the next 6 hours, Court watched as humanity threw itself at the barrier with single-minded determination. 417 spacecraft were destroyed. 417 crews of human volunteers who knew they were probably going to die but went anyway. The outpost's long-range sensors could even pick up the communications from some of the craft before they were destroyed. Humans calling out data to their colleagues, reporting their findings, encouraging those who came after to try different approaches. They were treating it like the space program that had killed those astronauts in Commander Zelthar's footage. Every failure was a lesson. Every death was data for the next attempt. "They're insane," Prex muttered, watching another wave of craft vaporize against the barrier. "Absolutely insane. Don't they value their own lives?" Court remembered the footage from the Academy. They value their freedom more. Finally, the launches stopped. The Sol system went quiet again, though Court could see the feverish activity still happening on the human homeworld. They were analyzing data, building new craft, planning their next attempt. It took 3 days for the Council Response Force to arrive. An entire fleet of warships materialized at the edge of the quarantine zone, their weapons powered and shields raised. At their head was a massive dreadnought, and aboard it was someone Court recognized. Commander Zelthar. The old warrior's face appeared on the outpost's main view screen, looking even more weary than Court remembered. "Lieutenant Court, I'm told you were on duty when this began." "Yes, sir. I have all the recordings ready for your review." "Good. I'm coming aboard. We need to discuss what happens next." When Zelthar materialized in the outpost's transport bay an hour later, he looked like he'd aged another century in the 3 months since Court had seen him. The commander moved slowly to the observation deck and stood staring at the Sol system in silence for a long moment. "They did it," Zelthar said finally. After 73 years, they finally found a crack in our cage, even if it was only for a fraction of a second. Sir, with respect, shouldn't we be strengthening the barrier, making sure they can't try again? Zelthar smiled sadly. We've already tried. The barrier is now running at 150% capacity. Do you know what the council engineers told me when I asked if we could make it stronger? They said we've already exceeded the safety margins. If we push it any harder, we risk a cascade failure that could bring down the entire quarantine. Court felt his blood run cold. You mean the humans actually have a chance of breaking through? I mean the humans have already won. They just don't know it yet. Zelthar pulled up a star chart. That first probe didn't just penetrate the barrier temporarily. It sent out a pulse, a signal that traveled faster than light. Do you know what that means? Court thought for a moment, then his eyes widened. They've developed FTL technology. Crude? Yes. Unstable, certainly. But functional enough to send a pulse outside their own system. The Council's greatest fear has been realized. Humanity now has the basic foundation of interstellar travel. The barrier isn't keeping them contained anymore, it's just annoying them. Zelthar pulled up the recordings of the human probe attacks. He watched in silence as craft after craft threw themselves at the barrier. When it was done, he looked at Court. Tell me what you see. I see humans being willing to die to break free. No. Look closer. Look at the pattern of their attacks. Zelthar enhanced the tactical display. Notice how they're not just randomly throwing things at the wall? Each wave targets a different section of the barrier. Each approach uses a slightly different energy frequency. They're systematically mapping its weaknesses. This wasn't a desperate escape attempt, Lieutenant. This was a research operation. Court studied the patterns and realized Zelthar was right. The human attacks had been coordinated, methodical. They'd lost over 400 craft, but they'd gained invaluable data about the barrier's structure and vulnerabilities. How long until they can break through? Court asked. The Council's analysts say anywhere from 5 to 50 years, depending on how quickly they can develop the technology. But I think they're wrong. I think it'll be sooner. Much sooner. Why? Zelthar gestured to the recordings again. Because they're not working alone anymore. Look at the crew manifests we intercepted from those craft. Do you see the names? The ethnic backgrounds? Humanity has united behind this goal. Every nation, every culture, every faction on that planet is working together for the first time in their history. When humans cooperate instead of fight each other, they're capable of extraordinary things. A soft chime from the communications station interrupted them. The duty officer looked up, confused. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Sol system. It's on an open channel addressed to anyone listening. Should I play it? Zelthar nodded. Let's hear what they have to say. The view screen flickered to life, showing a human male of middle years with gray hair and calm, intelligent eyes. He wore what looked like a formal suit, and behind him was a symbol that Court's translator identified as belonging to the United Nations. Apparently, some kind of global human organization. Greetings. To whoever's listening, the human said in his own language, subtitles appearing automatically. My name is Secretary General Martinez. I speak on behalf of the people of Earth. We know you can hear us. We know you're watching, and we want you to understand something very important. Martinez paused, choosing his words carefully. 73 years ago, your people came to our world. You watched us, studied us, and made a decision. You decided we were too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable to join your galactic community. You put us in a cage and told us it was for everyone's good. You thought you were protecting yourselves from us. His expression hardened slightly. I'm not here to argue whether your fears were justified. Our history is violent. We've done terrible things to each other. But we've also done something you apparently didn't anticipate. We've grown, we've learned, and we've united. Martinez stood, and the camera pulled back to reveal a room full of humans behind him. Different ages, different ethnicities, all wearing similar formal attire. In the past 70 years, while you kept us isolated, we did something humanity has never managed before. We ended war on our planet. Not perfectly. We're still human, still flawed. But for the first time in our history, we're not killing each other over territory or resources or ideology. Do you know why? He smiled slightly. Because you gave us something else to fight. You gave us a common challenge. You told us we couldn't leave our own system, couldn't reach the stars, couldn't take our place in the wider universe. And so we redirected all our energy, all our ingenuity, all our stubbornness towards solving that problem. Martinez's voice grew stronger. Today you saw what we've built. Those weren't military vessels attacking your barrier. Those were volunteers. Scientists, engineers, test pilots, people who knew the risk but went anyway because they believed in something larger than themselves. We lost 417 people today. Their names will be remembered. Their sacrifice will be honored. And their data will help us succeed. He leaned toward the camera. This is not a threat. This is a promise. We will break through your barrier. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. Humans don't give up. We don't know how. You've studied us long enough to know that's true. So I'm asking you to consider an alternative. Talk to us. Come down to earth. Meet us face to face. And judge us not by who we were, but by who we've become. Give us a chance to prove we've earned a place among the stars. Because if you don't, he paused. If you don't, we'll break through anyway. And when we do, we'll carry with us 73 years of resentment about being locked away like criminals for the crime of being human. Is that really how you want first contact to go? The transmission ended. The observation deck was silent. Even Prex, who'd spent 5 years being bored by humanity, looked shaken. Well, Zelthar said quietly. That complicates things. Sir, what do we do? Court asked. That's not our decision to make, Lieutenant. That's for the Council. But I'll tell you what I'm going to recommend. The old commander pulled up the tactical display again, showing Earth and its quarantine barrier. I'm going to recommend we lower the barrier voluntarily. Let them out before they break out. Because that human was right about one thing. They will succeed eventually. And I'd rather greet them as equals than as prisoners we couldn't hold. The Council will never agree to that, Prex said. They're terrified of humanity. They should be, Zelthar replied. But not for the reasons they think. They're afraid of human violence, human aggression, human capacity for destruction. But that's not what makes humanity dangerous. What makes them dangerous is exactly what we just saw in that transmission. It's their hope, their refusal to accept limitations, their absolute certainty that they can overcome any obstacle if they try hard enough. He turned to face his officers. You can defeat an aggressive species. You can contain a violent species. But how do you stop a species that treats your walls as puzzles to be solved? How do you cage people who see barriers as challenges? How do you keep imprisoned a species that grows stronger, not weaker, when you push them down? Court understood. You can't. Exactly. So the question becomes, do we want them as allies or adversaries when they inevitably break free? Do we want to be the jailers they escaped from, or the neighbors who welcomed them home? Over the next week, more transmissions came from Earth. Not demands or threats, but olive branches. Humans broadcasting music, art, scientific discoveries. They showed their cities, now cleaner and more efficient than they'd been during the original observation period. They showed their people, cooperating across old boundaries. They showed a species that had spent 73 years proving they deserved a second chance. And slowly, painfully, the Council began to debate what to do. Meanwhile, Court watched the Sol system and noticed something interesting. The humans had stopped launching probes at the barrier. Instead, they were building something new. Construction yards in Earth orbit were working around the clock on what looked like a massive spacecraft, larger than anything they'd built before. What are they making? Prex wondered aloud. Court enhanced the sensor image and felt his stomach drop. The ship was enormous, with a strange design he'd never seen before. But more importantly, it had one defining feature. Massive engines that thrummed with the same kind of energy signature that had allowed the first probe to momentarily pierce the barrier. They weren't just planning to send a probe through. They were building a ship to carry their people through. They were preparing to break out by force if diplomacy didn't work. How long? Court asked the sensor officer. Based on their construction rate? 6 months. Maybe less if they accelerate the timeline. 6 months until humanity either won their freedom through negotiation or took it by force. The Council had 6 months to decide whether to open the cage. Court had a feeling. He knew which option the humans were betting on. The Council chambers on Arcturus Prime hadn't seen this much activity in decades. Representatives from 47 member species filled the vast amphitheater, their voices rising in a cacophony of debate. Translators struggled to keep up as delegates argued in a dozen different languages, their gestures ranging from the subtle to the wildly animated, depending on their biology. Commander Zelthar stood at the speaker's podium, waiting patiently for the chaos to subside. He'd presented his findings, shown them the footage, delivered his recommendations. Now came the hard part, convincing them to actually listen. The council speaker, an ancient Vaxian named Elder Syrinx, finally raised her crystalline staff and struck it against the floor. The sharp sound echoed through the chamber, and gradually the arguments died down. "Thank you, Commander Zelthar, for your comprehensive report," Syrinx said, her voice carrying the weight of 5 centuries. "The council will now hear arguments for and against the proposed reduction of the Sol quarantine. Delegate Cadets of Threxia, you have the floor." A massive Threxian rose from his seat. Court recognized him as Cadet Court's father. The delegate's mandibles clicked sharply, a sign of agitation. "Honorable Council, we are discussing the most dangerous decision in galactic history. Commander Zelthar would have us lower the barrier and invite these humans to join our society. Has everyone forgotten why we placed the quarantine in the first place?" He activated a holographic display that showed scenes from Earth's violent past. Wars, weapons, destruction. "Look at their history!" They nearly destroyed themselves a dozen times. They built weapons that could sterilize their entire planet. They fought wars that killed millions over invisible lines on maps. And we're supposed to believe that 70 years of isolation has somehow cured them of their violent nature? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Cortex pressed his advantage. "The commander shows us recordings of humans sacrificing themselves for research. He calls it noble. I call it proof of their fundamental recklessness. What sane species sends hundreds of people to certain death just to gather data? What rational beings throw themselves at an impenetrable barrier over and over? These are not the actions of a mature, peaceful civilization. These are the actions of a species that values victory over life itself." More species nodded. The mood of the chamber was shifting against Zelthar's proposal. "Furthermore," Cortex continued, "we've seen what happens when aggressive species gain access to galactic technology. The Kryn Wars devastated 12 systems before we could contain them. The Vexit Uprising nearly fractured the Council itself, and both of those species were far less violent than humanity in their pre-contact period. If we let humans out now, we may be unleashing something we can never control." He sat down to a wave of approving sounds from various delegates. Elder Syrinx turned to Zelthar. "Commander, how do you respond to these concerns?" Zelthar took a moment to organize his thoughts. "Delegate Cortex makes valid points. Human history is violent. They are reckless by our standards. And yes, they could pose a danger if integrated improperly. But he's leaving out critical context. He changed the holographic display to show the recent footage from Earth. This is what humanity looks like today. These are their cities, clean and efficient. This is their society, unified for the first time in their history. These are their people, working together across old divisions. The species Delegate Cortex describes no longer exists. At least, not in the same form. 70 years of evolution doesn't erase millions of years of violent instinct, Cortex shot back. "No," Zelthar agreed, "but it can redirect it. The humans haven't stopped being who they are. They've just found a new outlet for their energy. Instead of fighting each other, they're fighting to break free. Instead of building weapons to use on themselves, they're building spacecraft to reach the stars. Their nature hasn't changed, but their focus has." A new delegate stood. Representative Mira of the Lumerian Collective, known for her moderate views. "Commander Zelthar, I find myself torn. On one hand, I'm moved by the footage you've shown us. Those astronauts facing death with such courage, the volunteers sacrificing themselves for research, it speaks to a nobility of spirit. But on the other hand, Secretary General Martinez made it clear in his transmission that humans will break through with or without our permission. Isn't that a threat? Doesn't that prove they're still fundamentally aggressive?" Zelthar nodded. "It's not a threat, Representative. It's a statement of fact. And there's an important distinction. If they were truly aggressive, they wouldn't have broadcast that message at all. They would have kept working in secret, broken through without warning, and potentially sparked a conflict through misunderstanding. Instead, they're being transparent about their intentions. They're asking for dialogue even as they prepare for the worst. He pulled up the technical scans of the ship humanity was building. This vessel they're constructing, yes, it's designed to break through the barrier. But look at its other features. Minimal weapons, maximum sensors and communication equipment, quarters designed for diplomats and scientists rather than soldiers. They're not building a warship. They're building an embassy that can fly. An embassy armed with barrier-penetrating technology. Another delegate muttered. Would you go unarmed to meet jailers who've kept you imprisoned for 70 years? Zelthar countered. They're taking precautions, not preparing for war. There's a difference. Elder Syrinx spoke again. Let us hear from someone with recent direct observation experience. Lieutenant Court, step forward. Court felt every eye in the chamber turn to him. He'd been standing in the observation section, not expecting to be called upon. He approached the speaker's podium on shaking legs, very aware that he was about to address the most powerful beings in known space. Lieutenant Court, Syrinx said gently, you've spent the past months observing the Sol system more closely than anyone else currently present. What is your professional assessment of humanity's intentions? Court swallowed hard. His father was staring at him from across the chamber, clearly expecting him to support the quarantine. But Court thought about what he'd seen. The volunteers flying to their deaths to gather data, the global cooperation on Earth, the messages of art and science broadcast to an audience they hoped was listening. Honored Council, Court began, his voice steadier than he felt. I believe Commander Zelthar is correct. I've watched the humans closely. I've monitored their communications, studied their behavior, analyzed their construction projects, and I've come to a conclusion that surprised me. He activated his own display, showing the data he'd been compiling. The humans are afraid of us. Not of our military power. They've never seen it deployed, so they have no frame of reference. They're afraid that when they finally break through, we'll view them as invaders. They're afraid that their first true contact with galactic civilization will be violent. That's why they keep broadcasting messages. That's why they built their ship with communication arrays before weapons. They're trying desperately to avoid the very conflict we're afraid they'll start. His father's mandibles clicked disapprovingly, but Court pressed on. I was raised believing humans were savage, dangerous, barely controlled animals that needed to be caged. After watching them these past months, I realized that assessment is both accurate and completely wrong. Explain, Elder Syrinx commanded. Humans are dangerous. There's no denying that. They're capable of tremendous violence, single-minded in pursuit of their goals, and absolutely refuse to accept defeat. But they're also capable of tremendous sacrifice, cooperation, and creativity. The question isn't whether they're dangerous. The question is what they're dangerous to. Right now, they're only dangerous to the barrier holding them back. But if we continue to imprison them, if we refuse to even talk to them, then we risk making ourselves their enemy. And I don't think any of us wants to be the enemy of a species that treats impossible obstacles as personal challenges. Court looked directly at his father. Delegate Cortex asked what rational species sends hundreds of people to certain death just to gather data. I've thought about that question a lot, and I think the answer is a species that values the future more than the present. A species willing to sacrifice today so that tomorrow can be better. That's not recklessness. That's the most rational long-term thinking I've ever seen. He stepped back from the podium, his heart hammering. He'd probably just ruined his career and destroyed his relationship with his father. But he'd told the truth as he saw it. The chamber erupted into debate again. Delegates argued back and forth, some supporting immediate integration, others demanding the quarantine be strengthened, still others proposing compromise solutions. During a brief recess, Court found himself approached by Commander Zelthar. The old warrior placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. That took courage, Lieutenant. Especially given who was watching. Did I just end my career, sir? Possibly. Or you might have started a very different one. We'll see. Zelthar glanced toward where Court's father stood with a group of hardline delegates. Whatever happens, you spoke your truth. That matters. The recess ended, and the delegates returned to their seats. Elder Syrinx rose, her ancient frame moving with careful dignity. The council has debated this matter for hours. We have heard passionate arguments on all sides. Now we must make a decision. But before we vote, I will share something that has not yet been made public. She activated a new display showing what looked like distress signals. 3 days ago, a Council exploration vessel encountered a previously unknown hostile species at the edge of mapped space. The species, which we're calling the Devourers for lack of a better term, destroyed our ship before it could escape. We only know about them because of an automated distress buoy that managed to transmit before being destroyed. The chamber fell silent. This was news to everyone, including Zelthar. Preliminary analysis of the debris suggests the Devourers possess technology comparable to our own, possibly superior in some areas. More concerningly, they appear to be aggressively expansionist. Best estimates suggest they'll reach Council space within 5 to 10 years. Syrinx looked around the chamber. I bring this up because it contextualizes our debate about humanity. We're arguing about whether to let a potentially dangerous species into our society while indefinitely dangerous species approaches from outside. Perhaps the question we should be asking isn't whether we can afford to free humanity, but whether we can afford not to. Delegate Cadets stood immediately. Elder Syrinx, with respect, are you suggesting we use humans as, what, soldiers? Cannon fodder to throw at this new threat? I'm suggesting, Syrinx replied calmly, that we may need allies with exactly the kind of stubborn determination and combat innovation that humanity has demonstrated. I'm suggesting that the traits we fear in peacetime might be exactly what we need in war. That's unconscionable, another delegate protested. We'd be exploiting their violent nature for our own protection. Zelthar stepped forward. If I may, Elder Syrinx, I don't think you're suggesting we use humans as weapons. I think you're pointing out that they're going to break free regardless. And we have a choice about whether they emerge as our allies or as an unknown factor we also have to worry about while dealing with the Devourers. Precisely, Commander. Thank you. The debate took on a new urgency now. The threat of the Devourers hung over every argument. Some delegates argued that this proved humanity should be kept contained. The galaxy was dangerous enough without adding more unpredictable elements. Others argued the opposite, that humanity's unique traits might be necessary for survival. Finally, after hours more of debate, Elder Syrinx called for a vote. All those in favor of maintaining the Sol quarantine in its current form? About a third of the delegates activated their voting indicators. All those in favor of strengthening the quarantine? Only a handful voted for this option. All those in favor of initiating controlled contact with humanity with the goal of eventual integration? The rest of the chamber lit up with voting indicators. Syrinx studied the results. The motion passes. The Council will begin preparations for first contact with humanity. Commander Zelthar, I'm placing you in charge of the contact team. You will take a diplomatic vessel to Earth and open negotiations for humanity's entry into the Galactic Council. Zelthar bowed. I'm honored, Elder Syrinx. Don't be. If this goes wrong, you'll be blamed for starting the war that destroys civilization. If it goes right, you'll barely be remembered as a footnote in history. Either way, you have the hardest job in the galaxy. Understood, Elder. As the chamber emptied, Court found himself face to face with his father. The Elder Cortex's mandibles were clenched in disapproval. You spoke against me in open council, his father said quietly. You sided with aliens over your own people. I sided with what I believed was right, Father. You're naive. You've spent a few months watching humans from afar and think you understand them. I was there during the observation period. I saw their wars, their cruelty, their violence. You saw edited footage designed to make them look sympathetic. I saw the same footage you did, Court replied, keeping his voice respectful but firm. I just drew different conclusions. They're violent, yes, but they're also capable of change, of growth, of sacrifice for something greater than themselves. His father clicked his mandibles in dismissal. We'll see. When they emerge and prove themselves to be exactly what I warned about, remember this conversation. He walked away, leaving Court standing alone. Or not quite alone. Zelthar approached, having witnessed the exchange. That went better than I expected, the commander said dryly. Really? He basically disowned me. He didn't strike you or challenge you to combat. So yes, it went well by Threxian standards. Zelthar smiled slightly. Besides, he'll come around. Either because you're proven right, or because he'll need someone who understands humans when they do emerge. Either way, you've positioned yourself as the expert. I don't feel like an expert, sir. I feel like I'm guessing. Welcome to diplomacy, Lieutenant. We're all guessing. Some of us are just better at sounding confident while we do it. Zelthar pulled up a holographic display of Earth. Now let's discuss what happens next. In 3 days, we're going to lower the barrier and fly to Earth. We're going to meet with human leaders face to face. And we're going to either welcome a new species into galactic civilization or start a war we might not survive. No pressure, Court muttered. Exactly, so let's make sure we get it right.